Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Last time we created a text input field with a floating label, and today I want to show you how we can add some properties to the view so we can configure it when using it in our UI. We're going to use view modifiers, extensions, and the environment to achieve this. Using the environment will add some really cool superpowers to our SwiftUI component, and you absolutely don't want to miss this. But before we jump into the code, let's take a look at what we're going to build today. So here in our input form, we've got a bunch of text input fields, and I would like to be able to display a clear button in some of those fields, just like the one you know from Apple's apps, such as the Mail app or the home screen. So when I enter some text in those text fields, I can use the clear button to remove what I typed. And you will notice that not all of the input fields show a clear button. That might be because it might not make sense for all of those fields, or because I might be using these input fields on a screen where I don't want to give users the option to clear their input. So there might be several reasons for why we want to show the clear button, and sometimes we don't want to show it. Cool. So let's go back to where we left off last time and start implementing this. So here's the code we wrote last time. Here's the form you see on the right in the preview, and down here is the code for the text input field. Since the goal of this show is to teach you how to create a reusable SwiftUI view, we should extract this code into a separate file so we can actually reuse it in other projects. Let's move this to a new file. So unfortunately, Xcode has no extract to file refactoring, so we'll have to do this manually. So I'm going to cut the code and create a new file named just like the view, TextInputField. And conveniently, everything in this file has the right name, so we can just replace the default view with the code we just copied. Let's fix this compiler error down here and provide a label for the text input field and a constant binding. I'll just use my name. And let's also use size that fits so we can better see how this view looks like. Okay, so let's first add a clear button. We want the clear button to float above the rest of the view, so let's first create an overlay. And now we can create a button inside the overlay. When the user taps the button, we want to clear the text, so let's say text equals empty string. And instead of a text, we want to display an image. We can use the multiply icon from SF Symbols, so let's use image, system name, multiply.circle.fill. Okay, but instead of using the accent color, let's use system gray. By using system gray, we make sure that this also works in dark mode. Here, let me add a dark mode preview. Okay, great. But the layout doesn't look right. Let's right align the button. The easiest way to do this is to wrap this in a H stack and insert a spacer. And boom! The clear button is right aligned. Cool, so before we move on, let's check if this works well with long texts. Yeah, so unfortunately this overlaps a bit, but we can fix this by adding some padding to the text field. So now we've told the text field there is a little bit less space, so it will start using an ellipsis at the end of this long string. Awesome, this looks much better. Even though we haven't done much, the code begins to look a bit crowded down here. Let's try to make the code easier to read by refactoring this clear button. Instead of using the extract subview refactoring, I'm going to extract this into a computed property. This helps me to organize my code better, and I can still access all the properties in my main view. I explained this in more detail in the first video of this show, so if you'd like to know more about when to use which refactoring, go and check it out. Okay, let me create the computed property first, and then move the code for the clear button up using Command, Option, and square bracket. And then inside the overlay, I can now call clear button to render the clear button. And while we're at it, let me also clean up the button and use Swift's trailing closure syntax. Open the Code Actions menu using Command-Shift-A and then choose Convert to Trailing Closure. Looking at the preview, we can see our refactoring was successful. It still shows the same view. Great! So let's step back for a moment and think about how we could enable or disable the clear button. So one way to do this might be to just add another parameter to the constructor and let the caller decide whether or not to show the clear button. This would technically work, but it has a major drawback. If we add more and more ways to customize our view, the parameter list of the initializer will become longer and longer, making it harder to read and more difficult to understand which overloaded version to use. And if you look at all the other SwiftUI views, this isn't the way Apple built its own views. Their approach seems to be to only pass in the essential parameters via the initializer and use view modifiers instead to configure the view. And this is what we're going to do as well. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. So let's sketch out how this might look like. SwiftUI has a view modifier named Hidden that we can use to completely hide a view. Let me show you how this works in the preview provider. Boom! The view completely disappears. Okay, cool. So how about we just name our view modifier Clear Button Hidden, like this. And let's add a parameter to actually say whether we want it to be visible or invisible. Now, obviously, the compiler will complain because this doesn't exist yet, but I think this looks like a good API. Let's go ahead and implement this. Let's create an extension that contains the code to drive our property. I'll make this an extension on TextInputField. One of the cool features of SwiftUI is that it uses a Fluent API. This is what makes it possible to chain view modifiers. The key for implementing Fluent APIs is to return a reference to the instance you're operating on. So let's define a function named clearButtonHidden that matches the name we sketched out in the preview. And let's use an unnamed parameter so we can directly pass in true or false without having to specify the parameter name. And to make sure we can use this as a Fluent API, we need to return an opaque view and return a reference to self. Okay, now how do we actually toggle the visibility of the clear button? We cannot modify the state of the view since we are outside of the body. Now, what if I told you the easiest and most flexible way to do this is to use the environment? This is actually how this is implemented in SwiftUI itself, and it has a number of advantages that we will discuss in a bit. So on a high level, we want to do two things. One, we want to write a value into the view's environment that tells us whether the clear button should be visible or not. And two, we need to listen to that environment value in our view so we can update the view whenever the value changes. For reading values from the environment, we can use the add-environment property wrapper. And if you've done any amount of SwiftUI development, you will have used this before. But how can we define a custom environment key? Let's take a quick look at Apple's documentation. Here we see that we need to do two things. One, we need to define a struct that conforms to environment key and holds the default value for our new environment value. And two, we need to extend the environment value structure with a new property. Okay, let's do it. Let me first create a struct for the default value. I'll name it TextInputField clearButtonHidden, And you can choose any name that you want, but it has to conform to environment key. And now it's easy to use code completion to get this default value. By defining the default value as false, we make sure that the clear button is not hidden by default. And with that in place, let me quickly create the extension for environment value. Here we're using the type of the environment key as a subscript index to read and update the value in the environment. Perfect. So now we can use this to store the clear button state in the environment. We can use the environment view modifier to set the value from inside our own view modifier. So the compiler complains because we're not using the result of the call to environment. And this is because environment is a view modifier. All view modifiers return the view they operate on, or a modified version of the view to be precise. And this means we don't need to return an instance of self, but can instead use the result of the call to environment. So let's delete this entire line. And now, thanks to implicit returns, the result of the call to environment will be returned. Right on. Now, as a final step, let's actually read this value inside our view. Let's define a property named clearButtonHidden and then use the addEnvironmentView modifier to read the value from the environment. And now, let's hide the clear button according to this state by wrapping the contents of the H stack in a conditional. Let's see how this looks like. So that doesn't look too bad, but there is a small issue with the very long text here, and that's because we didn't remove the padding. So let's quickly do that. The best way to do this is to just use a computed property that tells us how much padding we need. If the clear button is visible, we need 25 pixels padding, and if it's hidden, we need no padding. So we can replace the hard-coded value down here with the computed property, and once the preview has updated, we'll see that this looks much better now. Actually, let's use the preview to see this in action. So I can turn on and off the clear button using this view modifier, which is really neat. And I can even use the parameter to drive the visibility of the button. Now, this is great, but wouldn't it be great if we could turn this off for all elements of a container at once? Let me show you what I mean. So let's go back to the form. And here in the form, we've got all our fields. Now let me use the text_case.uppercase view modifier on the last input field here to turn everything in this field into uppercase. Cool. And now I'm going to move this line down so it applies to the entire section. Boom! Now all the fields are in uppercase. So, can we do the same for the clear button? Let's see. I'm first going to apply the view modifier to one of the input fields to hide the clear button for just this one input field. And now let's see if I can apply it to the section. So it appears we can't. Let's check the error message. Okay, so the error message says that the section doesn't have a member named clearButtonHidden. And that's actually true. We define it just on the text input view. And we can't very well create an extension for every kind of SwiftUI view just to register our view modifier. And we actually don't need to. Let's go back to our view. And then make this an extension on view instead. Right, let's go back into the form to see if this works now. Once the preview has updated, we can see that the view modifier now is applied to the entire section and all of the views inside. So if you ever wondered why view modifiers are an extension of view instead of the concrete view you want to apply them on, now you know. And this even works if I want to turn the clear button back on for just one field. Check this out. Boom! The clear button is disabled for all fields except for this one. And all of this works because SwiftUI manages the environment for us. Pretty cool, huh? Congratulations for making it to the end. If you've coded along and would like to compare your result with the official solution, check out the repository for this series where I publish all the code that you see in these videos. Understanding how to use the environment is a major step in writing configurable SwiftUI views that you can reuse across projects and even share with the community. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at how to expose the inner state of a component to the outer world in a safe way. This might come in handy, for example, if you want to build a complex form validation and need access to the validation state of your custom input fields. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, give me a thumbs up. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.